What's up everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be sharing with y'all this sewing tutorial for this halter corset top. The PDF pattern is available for purchase in the link in my bio. This is a block, so I highly advise to make a sample first and adjust where needed to make it fit your body type, and of course make any modifications to make it your own. For your supplies, you're going to need your usual fabric scissors, paper scissors, thread, pins, marking chalk. I'm going to be working with a medium weight raw denim, but you can make this pattern out of any cotton twill, poplin, any medium weight, and you're gonna need half a yard. You're also gonna need a lining fabric. I'm using silk dopioni, but any light to medium weight fabric, you're also gonna need a half a yard. Then you need a thin ribbon for your lace up. You can also choose to use grommets instead. Hook and eyes, I'm using flat hook and eyes, but you can use regular ones. And Ridgeline boning. This pattern is available in A4, US letter, and A0. Make sure to print out that first page and test out your 2-inch square box to make sure it's to scale, and then print out the rest of your pages. Reference your layout page and tape all of your pages together at the black lines. Reference the size chart included in the written instructions and cut out your size. Familiarize yourself with the grain line on the pattern pieces and the grain line on your fabric, which should be parallel to the selvage edge. Fold your fabric in half with the right sides together and cut out 2 mirrored pieces of each pattern piece. The center front should be placed on the fold for both your shell and lining pieces. Remember to mark all of your notches with your chalk and then cut out all of your pieces. I like to lay out all my pattern pieces and pin them in place, making sure to line up all your notches so that whenever I go to sew, I'm not confused on which pattern piece goes to what. This pattern includes 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is usually the distance from your needle to the edge of your presser foot, but it depends on your machine. You're gonna sew a straight stitch on each of those seams, making sure to back stitch at the top and the bottom, and then iron all of your seams flat open. I like to use a tailor's ham because it makes all of the curved edges so much easier to press. After pressing everything flat, now you're ready to add the boning. This is a design choice. You can choose to add the boning how I will be showing you here, or you can add boning channels onto the shell if you wish to have that detail. Measure out your boning pieces for each seam, and you're going to make them 1 inch shorter than your seam, allowing half an inch space at the top and the bottom, so whenever you go to sew your lining and shell pieces together, you're not sewing over the boning. You should have a total of 8 boning pieces for the lining and 2 for the shell, which will be attached to the center back. Then you're going to round out the edges of your boning so you don't have sharp edges. With time, they could end up poking through your fabric. You can either use a lighter and melt the edges and smooth them out on a flat surface, or you can add a little bit of masking tape to both ends. On the lining, center the boning on the inside of your seams and use pins to hold it in place. On the correct side of your lining fabric, you're going to sew in the ditch of your seam directly on the boning. This is why you must use Ridgeline boning so you can sew through it. Make sure to secure your stitches at the top and the bottom. Repeat this for every single seam. To create the lace up, you're going to need a thin ribbon, a ruler, chalk, and your boning. You're going to repeat the same steps that we did for the lining and add a boning piece to the center back. But for this piece, we're going to add it to the right side of your shell. This is a design choice and up to you, but I decided to make my loop spacings 1 inch apart, but you can make them smaller. Using my ruler, I aligned it to the top of the boning and I marked 1 inch spaces along the entire boning piece. Then place your pins on each of those markings. In the clip here, I show that I'm inserting it from the center back in so that the dull side is facing out, but it should be the other way around. In this clip here, I have it the correct way. The pointy end of your pin should be coming out of the center back. You're then going to take your ribbon and place it on the first pin, securing it in place, and you're going to take your ribbon and loop it across to the other side of the pin. Underneath, take it down to the next pin underneath that one, cross over to the center back and loop it underneath and around the pin, back across to the dull end, and then take it back down to the next pin and repeat that same step all the way down until you reach the end. Take it to your sewing machine and secure it in place right down the center. Take this process nice and slow so that you don't break a needle. Now we're going to create a backing to go behind the lace-up. This is also optional. From your shell fabric, you're going to cut out 2 mirrored rectangles that measure 10.5 by 5.5. With the correct sides of your fabric together, sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all around, leaving only one end of your longest side open. Snip your sewn corners so you can flip the fabric inside out and have nice sharp edges. And then I like to use something dull but pointy like my long tweezers to poke out all of the corners. Place the open edge of the rectangle on the edge of the center back, sandwiching the boning with the loops in between, and sew it into place directly on the boning. This should be done on the correct side of the fabric, so when you flip it to the inside, the backing is behind the loops and the raw edges would be tucked inside. Now we're going to attach the lining to the shell. You're going to start off by sewing the neckline. Place your lining fabric on top of your shell with the right sides facing each other. Pin the neckline edges up to the straps, making sure your princess seams line up. Sew together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all around the neckline. Then you're going to cut snips up to your seam, not through, around the curves of your neckline to release tension and on the corners of those 90-degree seams. Iron your seam allowance raw edges towards your lining, and on the correct side of your fabric, we're going to sew an understitch 1/8 of an inch from your seam all along the neckline and up the straps. This keeps the lining from popping out the front. Flip the lining back over so the correct sides of the fabric are facing each other again, and pin all around the top, making sure your seams and edges line up. You're going to leave the very top of your straps unsewn, and you're going to leave about a 5-inch opening on the very bottom of your hem so that you can turn your top inside out after you're sewing. Sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around the top. And remember to leave that 5-inch opening at the bottom. Then cut snips into the curved edges of your top. Remember to snip to but not through the seam. I snipped around the armholes and I cut off the sharp corners of the center back on both the top and the bottom. Flipped the top completely inside out through that 5-inch opening. Make sure to take it a corner at a time. This part can be difficult, especially because of the boning. You might need to readjust your boning channels to make them straight again, but this is very possible. After flipping it inside out, press everything completely flat. You're then going to fold over the seam allowance on that 5-inch opening that we left and on the straps. We're going to hand sew these openings closed. To close up that bottom opening, I'm going to take my thread and needle and I'm going to cut a piece of thread and only tie off one end. And I'm going to be sewing a ladder stitch to close up the opening. To sew up that 5-inch opening on the bottom, we're going to sew a ladder stitch. To do this stitch, you basically are taking a few threads from the seam allowance of the shell and the lining fabric at the same time and sewing them together so the stitches are invisible on the outside. For the straps, I tried on the top and I pinned where I needed the straps to end. I made the straps long on this pattern so that, because I know everyone has different preferences for how tight they want their halters to be, but where the pin ends up is where I'll be adding my hook and eyes. I transferred my markings on the shell lining for one side and kept the marking on the lining for the other side, because for these flat hook and eyes, I'm going to have the flat end on the top of the left side of the strap, and I'm going to have the hook on the lining piece of the right side of the strap. And I doubled my threads so that the hook and eyes would be nice and secure. Now to lace up your corset. I cut a piece of ribbon that was 39.5 inches with the ribbon folded in half, but I advise to make it longer, so I suggest to cut your ribbon folded in half at 45 inches, so you have a total of a 90-inch piece of ribbon, so you have enough to loosen up the corset without taking it out of the loops. This is a method that I like to do to lace up my corset so that I'm able to tighten it from the top and the bottom at the same time. I insert the ribbons in through the top loops and then I crisscross them over to each side and keep repeating this until I get to the center of my corset. Now when you get to the center, you're going to take the right side ribbon and you're going to cross it over to the left side and you're going to skip one of the loops and insert it from the bottom up through the second loop instead. Then you're going to take it up and loop it through the one that we just skipped. You're going to repeat the same thing for the left side and you're going to skip one of the ribbons, loop it from underneath and then take it back up through the loop that we skipped, back down, and now you're going to keep crisscrossing the loops how we were before to finish off lacing up the rest of the corset. Then you're going to tie off the strings together at the very bottom and you're going to burn the edges since this is a polyester ribbon so that they don't fray. Then you're going to grab the two loops that you created in the middle and you're going to pull them tight. Lacing up your corset this way allows for the corset to be able to be tightened at the top and the bottom at the same time. And then you're going to tie off the ribbon to a nice bow and now your corset is all laced up. Thank y'all so much for watching and for purchasing my pattern. I would love to see what you all create, so please tag me or send me photos to my Instagram at in.vaed. As always, happy sewing and I will see you in the next one.